Occult Confessions is brought to you commercial-free through the generous support of our patrons. Visit occultconfessions.com and click on Donate to help keep the history of the occult on the digital airwaves. Hello, awesome occult friends, and welcome to our first episode of Awesome Occult Friends. Before we get started with today's stories, I wanted to take a moment to say hello to our new friends, Dex, Lilia M., Mikey M., and past and present. We also want to send a special word of consolation to Mike P., who lost his pet tarantula this week in a tragic spider racing accident. Legsy McFuzzleworth, you will be missed. And now on to today's stories. We've got 3 stories today, my dear male, female, and non-binary occult nerds, and all of them are from Japan. Do you know where Japan is? Do you have a globe in the house? Why not ask your mommy or daddy or whatever you call the third person in your polyamorous arrangement if they can help you find a globe? We'll wait. Now, see if you can find Asia. It's on the side of the world that's missing Canada. Now find Russia, right there under that big icy wasteland. Well, actually, a lot of that icy wasteland is Russia. Now trace your finger down and to the right, and look, those islands. There's Japan. Wait, no. That's Korea. A little further. There. Those islands. You know the difference between an island and a peninsula, don't you? Did you know that there are 14,125 islands in the island country of Japan, but only 260 are inhabited? Although Google AI will tell you 430 are inhabited, and curiously cite Wikipedia, which clearly says that the number is 260. But enough about the moronic technology that has infiltrated our lives without our consent. We, friends, are talking about Japan. Japan is the 3rd largest island country in the world, after Indonesia and Madagascar, and the 2nd most populous. Its 4 main islands are Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, and Shikoku. Our 3 stories today take place on the island of Honshu, the largest of the 4. Your storyteller today will be me, Dr. Rob. And for those of you who still haven't caught on to what I'm doing here because you don't have kids or your kids don't listen to podcasts, you might think maybe this is all right for children to listen to. Well, to clear things up, our themes for today's stories will include Buddhist compassion, freedom from attachment, the Lotus Sutra, murder, and sexual intercourse. If you're not sure what sexual intercourse is, I'll be explaining it in greater depth later in today's episode. Our stories today come from the Konjaku Monogatari Shu, or Tales of Times Past, a collection of over 1,000 stories completed between 794 and 1185. Of the 31 original volumes, 28 are known today. Isn't that exciting? All right, let's get started, shall we? Our first story is about the power of copying out the Lotus Sutra, or Sadharma Pundarika Sutram, one of the best known and most revered sutras in the canon of Mahayana texts. Ordinarily, it's not all right to copy, like when my college students copy the answers to my essay questions from ChatGPT, but in this case, copying was a good thing. The Lotus Sutra is understood to be the final teaching of the Sakyamuni Buddha, or the historical Buddha, however you'd like to view him. It teaches the skillful means whereby a person might attain Buddhahood. All of the practices taught by the Buddha are, according to the Lotus Sutra, part of the one vehicle that expresses itself in a variety of modes. There is unity amidst difference, and though there may be many paths, many teachings, and perhaps many Buddhas, all lead in the same direction, as taught by the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha shared the parable of the burning house, in which a father must get his children free of the house, because the house was on fire. The father uses different toy carts to get his children out of the house, and once they are out, he gathers them together on one great big cart. Many different paths lead to the one vehicle. Do you see? The Buddha exists across innumerable and immeasurable time spans to teach us the way out of this burning house. The notion that a Buddha dies, or that the Sakyamuni Buddha was a human who was born and died, is in fact an illusion. The Buddha continues on in various forms, sharing his wisdom even right now. The Pure Land is not separate, but immanent in our own world, and the Buddha teaches us from this place. Now, it just so happens that the Lotus Sutra came in very handy for a monk of the Dojoji Temple in Kai Province, who used it to save 2 snakes. It was, as the Japanese say, the olden times, and 2 monks were on their way to visit the shrines in Kumano. There are, in fact, over 3,000 shrines at Kumano, created through a process called bunrai, in which a kami spirit is propagated or divided and then invited to reside in a new shrine. One of the monks was old, and the other was young and handsome. Perhaps the older one was handsome too, but the story isn't clear on that point. The older monk wore a black robe, and the younger monk wore a yellow robe. Anyway, they were going to the Kumano Mountains with the many shrines, when in Muro County they inquired at the house of a young widow with several female servants whether they might stay the night. The young widow agreed, but around midnight she crept into the room with the 2 monks, and draping her robe over herself and the young monk, crawled into bed with him as he slept. She cuddled up to him, and she nuzzled him, and she tapped him on the shoulder, but the young monk didn't wake up. So she shook him, and as soon as his eyes were open, she said, "I have never let a man stay with me in my house until this night, but since the moment I first saw you, I resolved that I must make you my husband. That's why I let you stay with me in my house. I thought, I will let this young, attractive monk stay with me in my house, and he will be my husband. My husband is dead and gone. Make my wish come true, and be my husband." But, despite how beautiful and presumably naked the young widow was, the young monk was committed to his vow. He said, "I have kept my body and my mind clean and traveled far to visit the spirits in the shrines of Kumano, of which there are 3,000. If I were to break my vow, we would both be committing a grave mistake. So please, get out of this bed straight away." Still, the young widow would not let him go, and tried every way she could to tempt and attract him. The young monk said, "I do not reject your request completely. However, you must first let me visit the shrines, and light the lanterns, and make offerings. On my way back from the shrines, I will swing by, and accept you as my wife." Satisfied with this, the woman went back to her own room, and the 2 monks continued on to the sacred shrines. In his absence, the young widow yearned for the young monk, and did many things to prepare for him, that is to say, for his return. But the 2 monks decided to go home by a different road, sparing the young monk the beautiful widow's temptation. And when her monk did not return, the widow went out on the road and began to search for him. She happened upon another monk who said that he had seen an old monk in a black robe and a young monk in a yellow robe, as she described, passing along the road back from Kumano a few days ago. Enraged and insulted and heartbroken, the young widow ran back to her house and locked herself in her bedroom and pined away until she was dead. Or she seemed to have died. Rather, she vanished, and a great green viper, 30 feet long, emerged from the bedroom and slithered its way out onto the road. One day, the two monks stopped along their journey. They needed to take a drink of water. A farmer hailed the two monks as he passed them. "Hello, honored sirs! I rushed ahead to tell you, for I have followed you from a distance for several days now. You have to know that there is something strange going on behind you. A snake has been following you over fields and mountains, a great viper 30 feet long with an arrowhead I would never mistake, for she is surely full of venom." Well, the old monk turned to the younger one. "It is that young widow. Surely her wicked intentions have transformed her into a poisonous snake." And the monks began to run. And they ran all the way to Jojoji Temple. Legend tells that the Dojoji Temple had been built by the Emperor Monmu for his wife Fujiwari no Miyako. For the Empress had been born the daughter of a humble fisherman who had prayed with his wife to Hashiman for a child. And so she was born. But she was completely bald and remained so as she grew. Fearing this was the fruit of karma from her misdeeds in a previous life, the fisherman's wife threw herself into the sea as a sacrifice. There, in the water, she discovered a glittering golden statue of Kannon Bosatsu, or Avalokitesvara, the female incarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. On rescuing the statue, the Bodhisattva granted the mother's wish, and Fujiwari no Miyako's hair began to grow. Her hair grew so beautiful that she was adopted by a wealthy imperial administrator who introduced her to the future emperor, who then, eventually, took her as his wife. And to honor her, he built the temple Dojoji in the fishing village where the statue of Kannon Bosatsu was found, in order to house the Bodhisattva's image. And this was the temple that our two monks arrived at, pursued by the gigantic female snake. "Quick!" they said to the monks of Dojoji. "We are pursued by a terrible beast!" And they told the story of the young widow who had been transformed and all the things that followed. And the monks of Dojoji took down the temple bell and hid the young monk inside it. And they closed the temple gate. And the old monk went with the other monks of Dojoji, and together they all hid. But the snake knocked itself 100 times against the gate, until the gate came crashing down. Then it wrapped itself around the bell and struck the bell for hours and hours until its head was bloody. And the monks of Dojoji and the old monk came out in awe of this snake's strange behavior, and the snake fled. But its poison had so engulfed the bell that suddenly the bell burst into flames, so that the monks dared not approach it. At long last, the fire subsided enough that they could douse it with water, but the monk inside was gone, reduced to ash completely, and the old monk finished the journey homeward, alone and sorrowful. One night, an old monk of the Dojoji temple had a dream, and in it a male snake still larger than the female one that had bashed herself against the bell and incinerated the young monk appeared to him. And the male snake in the dream said to the monk of the Dojoji temple, "It is I, the young monk who burned alive inside your bell. I have been transformed by the widow's passion into this beastly form. But when I was alive, I believed sincerely in the power of the Lotus Sutra. I beg you to rescue me and her by writing out the chapter on the Buddha's life from the Lotus Sutra, and with your pure heart you will save us." And the old monk did as he was asked, and wrote out the Lotus Sutra. And still more, he dedicated a whole day's service with all of the other monks in the Dojoji temple to save the young monk and the young widow. And as he slept that night, they appeared to him in a dream to thank him and say that he had indeed saved them by writing the Lotus Sutra. They had gone to the Pure Land, and the young widow had gone to the Torii heaven, and the young man to the Tosotsu heaven. Telling this story many years later to a young monk who had just come to Dojoji, a monk who had witnessed these events said, "In this story, we can hear the fearful strength of a wicked woman's heart, which is why the Buddha has warned us to keep a distance from women and avoid them." Such then is the story as it has been handed down to us. Well, what did you think of that, friends? Is that really the lesson of the story? Should we keep our distance from women? What if we are women? Should we keep a distance from ourselves? The Dojoji temple itself was inspired by the example of two good women who honored the bodhisattva of compassion. In hearing the tales of Japanese lore and legend, we have to keep in mind that the moral is never as straightforward as the storyteller pretends. While it is impossible to know the medieval storyteller's intention, it is often possible to read the moral as having a sense of humor, if not irony. The monk wasn't blameless after all, was he? He made a false promise to the widow that cost her so much grief that she became a hungry serpent. And the young widow was forgiven in the end and sent to the Torii heaven, even if her monk got to travel a little higher. She suffered for her loneliness many times over and deserved a happy ending, don't you think? The important thing for both of them is that they were separated. Clearly, it was not a very healthy relationship either way, and that is why I always tell you, friends, to never be more into your lover than your lover is into you. Our next story is about a county administrator of Tamba province who had a statue of Kannon made. Kannon, remember, is the bodhisattva or goddess of mercy in Japan. As I mentioned in our previous story, Kannon was derived from the male bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, but he was feminized into the female Guanyin in China and Kannon in Japan. Kannon takes on many different forms in Japanese iconography and belief. Senju Kannon has 1,000 arms to reach out to all beings in need. Juichi Men Kannon has 11 heads with 11 faces, representing the many aspects of compassion. And Nyorin Kannon holds a wish-granting jewel to grant the deepest desires of her followers, like, for example, that their bald daughter grow long and luxurious locks of hair. The county administrator wished, in olden times of course, to have a statue of Kannon made, and he went to a sculptor of Buddhist sculptures in Kyoto and asked him to make the statue. And the sculptor agreed, and the county administrator paid the sculptor and left to go home. Now, As it happens, the sculptor was a great fan of the Bodhisattva canon and read the 33 verses about canon in the Lotus Sutra every day without fail, and held a service in honor of canon on the 18th day of every month, for the 18th day is, after all, canon's enichi, or related day of connection, what we in the West might call a holy day, and it happens every month. What I'm trying to say is, this sculptor really loved canon very much, and whereas most sculptors finished their projects later than their customers expected, even though they were always paid in advance, this particular sculptor finished this particular statue of canon in just 3 months, much faster than the county administrator had expected. Oh, and by the way, the statue was quite beautiful. Now, the county administrator was so impressed that he thought to himself, "Oh, I must give this artist a special reward for such a beautiful work that has been finished so very quickly." But the county administrator, while he had money enough to commission a statue of canon, was not especially wealthy. All he really owned was his horse, and he took excellent care of that horse. The horse was black, 5 years old, with a gentle nature and strong legs. The horse walked and ran with great agility, and neither scared nor tired easily. All who saw the horse were jealous of the county administrator and wished that they could have the horse. The horse was all the county administrator had to give to the sculptor to acknowledge his speedy and excellent work. And so he rode out to see the sculptor and exchanged his excellent horse for the sculptor's less excellent horse. But when the county administrator got home, he found he missed his horse terribly. Murderously, even. He was filled with regret, and he called one of his assistants to him, and he said, "It was a terrible decision to give my horse away to that sculptor. Even if his work was wonderful and worthy of reward, I am deeply regretful, and I want you to help me get my horse back." The assistant was anxious to please the county administrator, hoping there might be some way he could get ahead through helping him. The county administrator had a truly shocking proposal, though. "Pretend you're a robber," he said. "Shoot the sculptor and bring my horse back to me." The assistant, despite the shocking proposal, was not at all shocked. "I should be able to do that easily, sir," he said, and grabbed a bow and arrow and set off on his task. Seeking to overtake the sculptor, the assistant took a shortcut and waited in a chestnut grove in Shinomura for the artist to come past on the main road. As the sculptor began to make his way up the road, the assistant was filled with doubt. How could I do such a wicked thing, he asked himself, but he thought of how he depended on the county administrator and how his job might be in jeopardy if he did not follow through on this dreadful task. And so he shot his arrow from 40 feet away as his horse charged toward the sculptor. This was, for such a man on such a horse, what we might call today a point-blank distance, and the arrow struck the sculptor just above the navel and went through the hapless victim so that the point stuck out his back. The sculptor fell, and the horse ran free, and the assistant caught the horse up and brought it back to his master. Now, the county administrator was overjoyed to receive his horse again, and thanked the assistant heartily, which was all he could afford by way of gratitude. Days passed with no word of the sculptor's murder, and so the county administrator sent his man on to Kyoto to inquire after the sculptor. Perhaps his death had not yet been detected, but surely he'd been missed. In any event, such an inquiry on the part of the county administrator would only give him the aura of innocence. But when the assistant arrived at the sculptor's house, the first thing he saw was his master's horse tied to the post, looking glossier and more glorious than ever, and eating fodder from 2 of the sculptor's friends. And the sculptor was on the porch of his house beside a plum tree, admiringly looking on at the horse. Well, the assistant was astonished and marveled, with a mind deeply troubled, at how a man he had just killed on the road and a horse that he had stolen and brought back to his master should be here in Kyoto. But he asked after the sculptor, as his master had instructed, and the artist said, "Oh, I've been very well. Many people would like to buy this horse, but it is so wonderful, I think that I will keep the horse for myself." Well, when his man came back to him with news of what he'd seen, and how he'd spoken to the sculptor, the county administrator was also amazed and deeply troubled in his mind. He ran to his stables and found that his horse was, in fact, missing. He continued on to his statue of Cannon with a mind to repent to the goddess of mercy. There, the county administrator found an arrow sticking through the statue and blood dripping down from the shaft. He showed his assistant, and they both fell to the ground, prostrating themselves and weeping. At once, they cut off their topknots and retreated to the mountain temple where they might train themselves in the way of the Buddha, for they knew just how badly they had gone astray. At the mountain temple, it is said that this is a canon that all thoughtful people should visit and worship, which is to say, all thoughtful people should visit and worship this county administrator's statue. Such, anyway, is the story as it has been handed down to us. Well, what did you think of that one, friends? Have you ever felt like the county administrator did in the story? Did you ever give a friend something you valued and feel like you wanted to murder them in order to have it back? Now, surely you've had regrets, but this is perhaps what the mountain monks meant at the end of the story when they said that everyone should visit this particular statue of Cannon. Our regrets are a source not only of great pain, but possibly great evil. And this might be visited on others if we aren't careful. Perhaps it is best to keep ourselves focused on the present and leave the past to itself, whatever we have done. To do otherwise is to put an arrow through the heart of mercy itself, and everyone is entitled to a little mercy. Wouldn't you say? Our last story today concerns an Oni. Oni are a kind of yokai, or demon, ogre, or troll. I had a little conversation online about yokai. Japanese folklore often tends to overlap these in ways that suggest the distinction between them is fairly fluid. It can be difficult to tell the difference between an Oni and a yokai, or an Oni and a tengu, or a demon and a yokai. This particular story calls the Oni a tengu goblin in the title, but then in the story itself, it calls this evil being an Oni. The tengu were originally Shinto spirits who over time came to be regarded as yokai, specifically inclined to deceive the pious or to otherwise disrupt Buddhists in the exercise of Buddhist principles. The tengu were sometimes the product of humans overtaken by vanity and pride, or the children of Izanami, the mother of creation, after her passage into the underworld. Oni are large, hulking creatures, with skin of varying shades, horns, and sometimes a third eye. They carry a club and wear a loincloth made out of a tiger pelt. Oni often disguise themselves to fool their victims, and the word Oni suggests a creature inclined to hide. They are capable of eating a person in a single bite, when they feel so inclined, that is, although the Oni in this story was not so concerned with murder as lust. Our last story tells of how the Empress Somedonu was abused by a Tengu goblin. The Empress Somedonu, the mother of the Emperor Montoku, was very beautiful, but very troubled. For you see, she was perpetually haunted by a Mononoke spirit. Mononoke were yet another class of spirits that overlapped with yokai and could cause possession, disease, and death. Neither priest, nor monk, nor doctor could heal the Empress Somedonu of her Mononoke spirit. As it happens, there was a great and noble high priest who lived at Kongo Hill in Yamato Province. He had trained extensively in the mystical arts and could perform supernatural feats, like having bowls and cups fly around and fill up with rice and water for his convenience. These magical feats earned him great fame, and so the supreme minister, Fujiwara no Yoshifusa, who was Somedonu's father, sent for this high priest to see if he might be able to pray for her and help the empress. The high priest refused, and he refused again, and he refused again, but the supreme minister was so persistent that eventually the high priest relented and came to pray for the Empress Somedonu. His prayer had an immediate effect. One of her ladies-in-waiting began to wail, clearly possessed by a spirit, and so they bound her and beat her until a fox jumped out of her clothing, and they bound the fox, and the high priest made the fox renounce its wicked ways. Fujiwara no Yoshifusa, the father of the empress and the supreme minister, he was so pleased that he asked the high priest to stay on while at the palace, and the high priest said that he would stay at the palace for a little while at least. This was a fateful decision, because, you see, one night he caught sight of the Empress Somedonu in an unlined summer kimono, the sexiest kind of summer kimono, when the wind blew the curtain of her room. The high priest was overwhelmed by her beauty. His heart was inflamed, and his mind troubled, and he began to languish for her. He lost all sense of reason in the face of this great passion, and one night he crept through the curtain as she slept and crawled into the bed with her. He tried to force himself on the empress, and she resisted him, perspiring as she did, and the court ladies surrounding her screamed, and the court physician ran in. The high priest was grabbed up and bound and tossed into the palace prison, but he was not dissuaded. He said, "I might die right now and become an Oni demon, but while this woman is still alive in this world, I will satisfy my desire for her." Sexual desire, while not a broadly accepted feature of the human experience in Japanese tales, could sometimes have positive consequences, believe it or not, and snakes notwithstanding. There's a story, for example, of the Bodhisattva of boundless space, who transformed into a lovely woman to help a wayward monk. The monk, you see, was no good at studying, but on his way home from a pilgrimage, he asked to stay overnight at the house of a beautiful woman. And when he crawled into bed with her, which apparently happens quite a bit in Japanese folklore, she said she would only consent to be intimate with him if he would memorize the Lotus Sutra. And when he did, and he returned to her and crawled into her bed again, she said, "Wait a second. I will in fact marry you if you come back a learned priest." And he went away, and he came back, and when he returned to her, and crawled into her bed once more. Well, they talked throughout the night about all of the things that he had learned, and his learning was so great that he could even devise new answers to questions she put to him that he'd never even thought of before. No, this, by the way, friends, is something a computer could never do. But he fell asleep talking to her, and woke up the next morning in an empty field, for the woman had, after all, been the bodhisattva of boundless space, and had channeled his desire to make this hapless monk a great and learned monk. The monk's restraint beside the beautiful woman was a door onto higher spiritual achievement. Delayed gratification can yield wondrous results. But this was not the case for the high priest bound in the palace prison. When a jailer overheard him vowing to take the empress by any means, he alerted the court. Worried over his proximity to the empress, the emperor banished the high priest back to his home in Congo Hill, where the high priest starved himself to death over the course of 12 days and was immediately transformed into an oni, per his wish. He was naked, except for his tiger skin loincloth, and 8 feet tall, with eyes as large as rice bowls and fangs as sharp as knives, and he carried a menacing mallet at his waist. He made his way back to the imperial palace and stood in the curtain of the Empress Somadonu's room. All who saw him as he made his way ran in fear from the Oni, but he enchanted the Empress's mind so that she thought he was a great and beautiful lover, and she dressed herself prettily for him and hid her face with her fan and invited him into her bed, where she lay with him. Then, when the sun had set, the Oni left. Now, when the emperor heard of this, he worried. What will become of her? That, by the way, is all he did. He worried that. Anyhow, the Oni returned every day, and every day the empress received him and lay with him. And the Oni possessed another of the court, who said, "I must get revenge on that court physician. I must get revenge on that court physician." After all, the court physician had been the one who got him thrown into the palace prison. Hearing this, the court physician, who knew it was the Oni who had set his sights on him through this possessed person, well, the court physician, he died from fright, and his sons went insane and died after him, I think just out of sympathy. The emperor had his priests pray ardently for the empress, and their prayers actually seemed to keep the Oni off, so that the empress began to regain some of her senses. And hearing that she had recovered somewhat, the emperor planned a visit to her. And all of his officials and administrators gathered together and went with the emperor to visit the Empress Somadonu's chamber. When they arrived, the empress was moved to see the emperor. But then, suddenly, the Oni leapt out from behind the curtain, amazing and frightening everyone, including the emperor. Then he disappeared behind the curtain again and enchanted the empress so that she followed after him. The emperor and his ministers were shocked, but not as shocked as they would be, for the Oni emerged from the curtains once more, this time on the south side of the room, and the empress followed him and lay with him right there in front of the whole court. I sort of imagine it happened standing up or something. And then they went back behind the curtain from whence they had come. The emperor grieved, and gathered his court officials around him and left to return to his quarters. One such official passed this story on to us, and he said, "Although this story is vulgar, and it should not be told openly, nonetheless, it offers a lesson for future generations, showing that women should not get close to priests like that." This, friends, is the story, as it has been handed down to us. Well, what do you think of that lesson? It seems the Empress was terribly troubled the whole story long by one evil spirit or another. Perhaps a magical priest was not the best answer for a possessed Empress. Perhaps she needed less enchantment and not more magic to answer her troubles. The story certainly has something to say about pride and ego. The high priest, so inclined to magical feats, was perhaps more susceptible to such passions because of this. It was his fame, after all, that had brought him to the palace. He also seemed to have a sense of foreboding. He didn't go very easily at first. Well, here's a fun project for you, friends. Why don't you draw an Oni with hideous teeth, an enormous eyes, and a mallet, and a tiger skin loincloth, and strange-colored skin, and here's what you do. Hide it somewhere in your house for your family or roommates to find. Better still, why don't you make yourself an Oni costume with paper plates for eyes, and stilts, and body paint, and stand over their bed while they're sleeping tonight, and see what they do when they eventually wake up and find you leering there silently. Yeah, now that I say it out loud, maybe don't do that. Maybe, just like do some macaroni art or something. Braid a keychain. Those stories were fun and exciting though, weren't they? Hey, would you like to visit the islands of Japan now? Wouldn't it be something to see those 3,000 temples in Komanu, or to run from a 30-foot-long snake, or to bind a fox spirit in your room until it vows to do better? If you go to Japan, please write and let us know. We'd love to hear about your adventures. And if you liked our stories today, they were taken in part and adapted from a collection of Japanese tales of fantasy and folklore, translated by Naoshi Koriyama and Bruce Allen. Until next time, I have been your storyteller, Dr. Robert C. Thompson, and this has been Awesome Occult Friends, brought to you by the Alchemical Actors and Occult Confessions.